Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed ISIS series mystery. Get your copy of ISIS All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Better get the coleslaw, y'all, cause we're having us a barbecue. Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global are in talks for a merger of the two struggling companies. How's that telecom bill of 1996 working out for you? Now, according to reports, Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav met with Paramount Global CVO Bob Bakish in a lunch meeting to discuss a possible merger, and they also talked with Sherry Redstone, whose group owns a controlling stake in Paramount Global, to discuss a potential combination of the companies. Now, Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global are only discussing merger because both companies are desperate to stay alive after taking major losses as related to investments in the entire platform of streaming. And that whole campaign to go into streaming has basically turned out to be a disaster for both companies, which are now bogged down in debt, with Warner Brothers Discovery bogged down in $44 billion in debt, and Paramount Global now bogged down in $13 to $15 billion in debt. And there's no real revenue coming into either company because both companies have suffered a series of box office flops and has to also deal with the aftermath of the WGA and SAG strikes. And with both of these companies taking on huge losses, we see that Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav has become extremely desperate because with Warner Brothers Discovery taking on major losses as related to his restructuring of HBO Max into Max and the numerous box office flops that he's had ever since fall of 2022 with Black Adam, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, The Flash, Blue Beetle, and the upcoming Aquaman and The Lost Kingdom, Warner Brothers Discovery has gone from being one of the biggest media companies in the Big Six media platform to basically winding up on the brink of bankruptcy. And with all of the talk about Warner Brothers Discovery possibly being on the brink of bankruptcy, David Zaslav has become extremely desperate to make this call to Bob Bakish because he knows that if he doesn't get any help, Warner Brothers Discovery may be the first of the Big Six to wind up economically imploding, and this could cause a chain reaction in the entertainment industry. Now, David Zaslav made the tactical error of thinking that he could merge his company to save it, but the problem doesn't lie with these companies. It lies with a piece of legislation that these corporate bosses lobbied for way back in 1996. The main reason why these studios are struggling at this point is not only because they miscalculated as related to streaming, it has to do with the fact that there is no real competition as related to entertainment anymore. The real problem is the Telecom Act of 1996 that was signed by Bill Clinton and lobbied for by members of the Republican Congress at the time. And that Telecom Act of 1996 was the bill that deregulated entertainment. And as entertainment was deregulated, it made it where corporations like Warner Brothers and Paramount at the time could go out and buy more than one TV station, more than one radio station, more than one newspaper, more than one magazine in a regional area, and that basically eliminated competition all across the country. And by 2001 to 2002, we went from having hundreds and thousands of independent TV stations, hundreds and thousands of independent publishers, hundreds and thousands of independent radio stations, and hundreds of independent production companies to a consolidation of 6 big media platforms such as Warner Brothers, Disney, News Corp, Comcast, and I believe there was Viacom at the time, and all of these, and Sony as well. These big 6 basically controlled media for close to a decade until they started to get even more greedy about getting more control over the media and more control over the narrative, that they started to think that they could go out and further take more control of the audience by going out and walking away from the lucrative deals that they had with Netflix and other streaming services like Amazon's Prime, and they thought they could make more money by having their own streaming services rather than get paid for producing content. Because back in the 2010s, most of these companies were making lots of money due to the popularity of the superhero movie craze, and they were also making lots of money due to lucrative deals that were made as related to going out here and leasing content to streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime. However, these executives started to get greedy during the pandemic, and as they got greedy during the pandemic and thought they would have complete control over a captive audience, what they did was go out and look to start their own streaming services and provide their own exclusive content, not understanding that if you go out and start a streaming service, you have to pay for the maintenance of the servers. Moreover, you have to go out here and also pay to produce the exclusive content, and that encroaches on all of your profits, because every dollar you're spending to make content is dollars that are basically being lost as related to the whole subscription. So that's what really started the decline of these big media companies, was their greed, because under the Netflix deal, they were basically being paid by Netflix to produce content. And as they were being paid by Netflix to produce content, they were reaping a revenue stream, but they wanted to get into the business of streaming, thinking that they could get more money for these subscribers, not understanding that the pie for subscribers was basically one that was fragmented already. And it was fragmented because if you've got people paying for multiple streaming services, it's going to cost the same as cable, and it's going to make it where people don't have the fiscal incentive to go out and pay for content. Moreover, when it came to a lot of the content that was being produced, it was basically being shuttled from one streaming service to the next, and that was not really helping in making the content have any sort of value. So the entire platform that these men built their business model on was fundamentally flawed, and it was fundamentally flawed because if you're shuttling content from one platform to the other, then people don't have an incentive to pay for it. Now, in addition to not having an incentive to pay for a lot of the content, a lot of the content on the streaming services was very old, and it was depreciating in value. And it was depreciating in value because as people were getting older, many of the content that was on there were becoming old movies to a lot of the young people that media needs to go out and have as their core audience. And that media that they thought had value, like a lot of older franchises which were hitting 40 years old, stuff like the old Superman movies, the old Batman movies, even Batman the Animated Series and Justice League, and even many of their other forms of content. A lot of this content had basically depreciated in value, but these CEOs thought that this content still had the same value that it had in the 1980s and the 1990s. However, that content doesn't have the same value to new generations like Gen Y or Gen Z or Generation Alpha, who grew up in a world of computers and look at this content as their parents' content, but you couldn't explain this to these out-of-touch CEOs who thought that, oh, we can build a streaming service on older content, not understanding that the median age for the average viewer of these streaming services is an older individual, and even for their television networks, which had lost 50% of their audience, the median age was getting older, and it was getting older because as related to the audience had basically, that grew up with this content, had grown older, but unfortunately the CEOs had not adapted to a business model to create new content to appeal to younger viewers. Because if you look at Warner Brothers Discovery's Max service, or you look at Paramount Global's Paramount Plus, there are a lot of old movies on that platform, but there's not much stuff there geared towards young children or teens and tweens, and that was a major tactical error from both executives and even the executives of other streaming services not to start producing content for younger viewers, such as the teen sitcoms that made Disney lots of money in the early 2000s, or the Nickelodeon sitcoms, or some of the animated series in the early 2000s like Danny Phantom and Fairly Odd Parents. I mean, Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global basically made a tactical error in not making content for children, and that has cost them as they got caught up in the superhero movie craze. And now that the superhero movie craze is over, both of these companies are reeling from the huge losses they took on many of the IPs that they adapted, and they're taking those losses because the generation of kids who grew up with that material basically has aged out, and as that group has aged out, they find themselves without any new content to create, and they've spent years creating content based on old IPs, thinking that Generation Alpha and Generation Z and the generations after this would be interested in them, but the world has changed too much for them and they don't really connect with that form of entertainment. So this is why both companies are in dire straits, and as they are in dire straits, they're hoping that a merger will save them. No, a merger will not save Warner Brothers Discovery or Paramount Global from their bankruptcy and implosion, because both of these companies have gone way too far, and the audience has basically walked away because they're not getting the kind of entertainment that they want. And there's no way to get that kind of entertainment because there's no competition. And there's no competition because the Telecom Act of 1996 has basically made it where nobody can compete, because nobody has an incentive to compete, because these big conglomerates have basically bought up all of entertainment, and as they've bought up all of entertainment to control the narrative of entertainment, what has happened is you have created an environment that does not foster competition. No, instead of fostering competition, they've created a business model where it's all about creating big budget summer blockbusters and big budget fall blockbusters, and not creating an environment where people have to compete by making smaller budgeted movies and having those small budgeted movies compete for an audience by presenting a high quality story. Because the way Hollywood makes its money is not on the big budget movies. No, it makes a lot of its money on the small budget movies. That's the way it's always been. And whenever Hollywood goes out and starts making these big budget movies, they wind up suffering like they did in the late 1960s, when all they focused on was making these big budget musicals, these big budget epic movies, these big budget war movies, and these big budget biopics, and these big budget literary movies. And the audience's taste had changed due to the Vietnam War, but Hollywood was tone deaf and refused to listen until independent filmmakers like the late Tom Laughlin and the late Melvin Van Peebles came along and showed them audiences that were looking to see something different, with Tom Laughlin's Born Losers showing us the life of the bikers and the Vietnam War's impact on people, and Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's song showing us how there was an audience of black people eager to see black films. And if it wasn't for those two men and Bill Cosby advising and helping out Melvin Van Peebles, we wouldn't have the Hollywood we have today, which they called New Hollywood. But now we are in an era where New Hollywood is basically in the same place that Old Hollywood is. And sadly, with New Hollywood, they're showing that they really are just as racist as Old Hollywood was, because instead of looking to court a black audience that was out here, that was shown with the success of Black Panther, what they did was try to sabotage the black fantasy genre that was coming up. And that basically was the thing that led to them having troubles. Now, Disney was the one who wanted to start sabotaging it, and then these other studios followed. But it was black films that basically saved Hollywood in the 70s, that and small budget independent filmmakers. And Hollywood has basically turned away from those groups and is now looking to, this is the reason why they're jammed up right now, because it was small indie films with small budgets that mainly saved Hollywood in the 70s and led to the resurgence of the 80s. But you have David Zaslav and Bob Bakish again, and Sherry Redstone, completely clueless, still trying to hold on to archaic, old, depreciating properties. I mean, for all of its worth, I mean, characters like the Terminator and many of the Warner Brothers properties, these characters are the same as Tom and Jerry to today's kids. So they're growing up in a world wanting their content, but we have executives that don't want to give them their content. No, they want to go out here and keep their narratives going in the media, and their narratives are basically sinking into the ground, which is sinking all of these companies. And rather than go out here and try to get help from whoever, what they do is continue to be proud. And that was shown with the way they mistreated Tyler Perry as he was looking to make an offer for Paramount Global's BET and VH1. They went out here and instead of taking the money from Tyler Perry and his group, they hoped to try to spike the price on what they knew was a depreciating network and knew it was a depreciating asset, and did this because they wanted to maintain power and control over the narrative. And this is the only reason why they gave Tyler Perry a hard time. Now, I am no fan of Tyler Perry at all. I think he's a clown and a bootlick. But the whole thing is, they didn't want a black man controlling the black image on BET. And now they're sitting there stuck with a network that they cannot move because they tried to artificially inflate the price and tried to gyp Tyler Perry, only gypping themselves, because now we have Paramount Global on the brink of debt, and we have Warner Brothers Discovery on the brink of bankruptcy. And both of these companies are struggling right now, and they're still sitting there thinking, oh, if we merge, it'll make things better. No, it was the mergers that made things as bad as they are right now, because the entertainment business, you need to compete, because when there is competition, there is a flow of ideas, and when there is a flow of ideas and a flow of creativity, then you have people incentivized to create in a competitive, environment, and they're incentivized to create in a competitive environment because all of them are going out here competing for those dollars instead of getting comfortable, which is what we're seeing right now. A lot of comfortable executives who go out here and are coasting on superhero movies, but they've run out of room as related to road, and they're about to hit a wall. And now that they're hitting a wall, what they think they can do is go and merge, and this will improve things. No, it's not going to improve things. It's going to make things worse, because with entertainment, you need competition. And if there's no competition, you cannot have any of that growth that you had in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s and the early 2000s and the 2010s, you can't have growth if there is no competition, and the only way to get back to competition is to repeal the Telecom Act of 1996. The Telecom Act of 1996, 30 years later, is the reason why entertainment is imploding. Now, some will say that it's imploding due to the so-called woke entertainment, but that whole value system and ideal system came from comfortable executives who basically thought they could coast on continuing to make the same content that was successful for the last 30 years and did not think that an entire generation would change and think about adapting. And as they have not thought to adapt their content, what's happened is they have suffered box office loss after box office loss, and they've lost lots of money on streaming because they don't know how to make content, and they don't know how to make content because they're not competitive. That's what's happening to American entertainment, and a merger between Warner Brothers Discovery and Paramount Global won't help anything except make it where more depreciating assets get warehoused together, because all of the content they've produced for the last century or so is depreciated assets. It doesn't have any value to this generation outside of historical context, and has no real value as related to entertainment to people who grew up in a different age. I mean, if you grew up in an age where you have films on your cell phone and YouTube videos you can watch at any time, why would you want to sit there and watch old movies that are 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years old? That's the critical question I would like to ask Bob Bakish and David Zaslav. I mean, where is the fresh content that's designed for children, teens, and tweens? And where is the competition at these companies? Because it's clear to me that the issues here, really as related to these companies being in the dire place they're in, have to do with all of the greed, and the greed to try to control all of the media is leading to all of the media slipping through the fingers of these oligarchs, and leading it to all of the sand falling into the hands of YouTubers like myself and publishers like myself who are independent, because these companies don't want to create content that relates to the customer, does not want to make content that relates to the average everyday American, and that's why we're losing all of the market share to companies outside of the country. Like with the comic book industry, manga is now dominating that entire marketplace, and the American comic market is only 9%. And American entertainment is basically on a road to winding up losing more market share, because we recently had a $15 million Godzilla movie outperform many of the big box office blockbusters. And it's just showing me how out of touch these executives are as related to entertainment, and shows me that we really do need these companies to basically fall, because these companies are run by incompetent people. And with Warner Brothers Discovery, I basically believe that they are beyond repair at this point. And with same thing with Paramount Global, these companies are in a bad place. And the main reason why they're in a bad place is due to the greed that they had in the 90s, thinking they could control all the media by growing out here and legislating that telecom bill of 1996. But it looks like to me, almost 30 years later, because we're almost near 2026 when that bill was passed, and it's looking to me like that telecom bill of 1996 is basically writing the epitaph for Hollywood and American entertainment. Now, if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find the books of the ISIS series, the Esteem series, the John Haynes series, the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, my black sorority novel, The Thetas, my black vampire novel, Eternal Night, and my black business novel, Recipe for Success. You can find all those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you want to pick up my first full comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can get a copy of that comic in paperback on Lulu.com right now by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to see me talk more about the entertainment industry and why it's in the dire place that it's in, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available on Lulu, John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at Lulu.com today. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS Legacy. The sorority secrets of the goddess next door are revealed in this all-new ISIS series adventure. Get ISIS Legacy in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.